They say power smells like burning gold and crushed roses. But I can tell you what it really smells like. Smells like cold iron. Like blood dried on marble. Like 3 years of your life turning to dust beneath a throne where no light ever reaches. My name is Catalina, and for 1095 days, I was nothing more than a shadow chained to the feet of a king who believed he owned the moon itself. This is the story of how the goddess proved him wrong. Before we begin, I need you to do something for me. If this story moves you, if it makes your heart race or your hands tremble, leave a comment below. Tell me the city you are watching from so that I can send you a hug. And please hit that subscribe button because what I'm about to share with you will change the way you see fate, power, and destiny forever. Now let me take you back to the night it all began. The first time I saw King Sebastian de Luminar, I was 16 years old, and he was dragging my father's body across the palace courtyard. I remember the sound more than anything else. The wet, heavy scraping of flesh against stone. My father had been a general once. A man whose name made soldiers stand straighter, whose tactical brilliance had won the kingdom of Salandria 3 wars in a single decade. But in King Sebastian's new order, brilliance was dangerous. Loyalty to the old king even more so. They came for us at midnight as they always did. The Lunar Guard they called themselves. 20 men in silver armor, bearing the crescent moon sigil that Sebastian had adopted the day he murdered his way to the throne. My mother tried to shield me. My 2 younger brothers, Diego and Mateo, barely had time to scream before the swords fell. I was left alive for a reason. Sebastian stood in our doorway, backlit by torches, his face half shadow and half flame. He was beautiful in the way that poisonous things are beautiful. Sharp cheekbones, black hair that fell to his shoulders, eyes the color of winter storms. 23 years old and already drowning in the blood of everyone who'd ever stood in his way. Catalina de Monteverde, he said, my name rolling off his tongue like a judgment. Your father killed my father in the Battle of Hierno Creek. Did you know that? I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. My mother's blood was pooling around my knees. I could kill you, he continued, stepping over her body with the casual indifference of a man stepping over a puddle. But that would be too merciful. Instead, you're going to serve me. You're going to live every day knowing that your existence continues only because I allow it. You're going to watch me build an empire on the ashes of everything your family believed in. He grabbed my chin, forcing me to look at him. His fingers were ice cold. You will be chained beneath my throne, he said. Where you belong. Where all traitors belong. That was the last time I spoke for 3 years. The throne room of the Palace of Celestial Peaks was a cathedral of cruelty. 70 feet of vaulted ceilings, walls inlaid with silver and moonstone, windows of stained glass that depicted Sebastian's conquests in lurid detail. And at the center of it all, the throne of lunar ascension, carved from a single piece of white marble veined with threads of actual silver. Beneath it was a crawlspace, 4 feet high, 6 feet wide. A cage built into the foundation of the throne itself. That became my world. They chained my right ankle to a bolt in the floor with 30 inches of iron links. Just enough to sit up, to lie down, to pace 3 steps in any direction. There was a thin mat, a bucket, and nothing else. No light except what filtered through the gaps in the marble. No sound except the muffled voices of courtiers and the constant rhythmic tapping of Sebastian's fingers on the armrest above my head. For the first month I cried. For the second month I raged, pulling at the chain until my ankle was a raw, bleeding mess. By the 3rd month I had gone silent, and I discovered that silence has a power of its own. From my cage beneath his throne, I heard everything. I heard Sebastian order the execution of Lord Fernando de Cortez for plotting against him. Fernando, who had been his mentor, his father's most trusted advisor. I heard him seduce Lady Isabella de Marquez, promising her queenship, then laugh with his guards about it afterward. I heard him declare war on the neighboring kingdom of Silvamora for the crime of refusing to acknowledge his legitimacy. I heard him rage and weep and scream in the dead of night when he thought no one was listening. I heard him talk to himself about prophecies and moon marks and a power he didn't yet possess but desperately craved. That's when I first learned about La Marca de la Luna, the moon mark. In whispers, his advisors spoke of it. An ancient legend, old as Salandria itself. Once every 100 years, the goddess of the moon would choose a mortal to bear her mark, a crescent-shaped brand that would appear somewhere on the chosen one's body during a lunar eclipse. The bearer of the mark would possess power beyond imagining. The ability to command not just armies, but the very forces of nature. To bend wills, to see the future, to remake the world. Sebastian was obsessed with it. Every night, he would dismiss his court and sit alone on his throne, talking to the darkness. "I am the rightful king," he would say. "I have conquered 5 kingdoms. I have executed my enemies and broken my rivals. Why will you not choose me?" Sometimes I wondered if he knew I was listening. If my presence beneath his throne was part of some sick ritual, as if keeping a chained enemy close would prove his worthiness to the goddess. But the goddess, it seemed, was not impressed by murder and tyranny. The lunar eclipse came in my 8th month of captivity. The entire palace gathered in the courtyard to watch as the moon turned blood red. Sebastian stood at the highest balcony, arms outstretched, waiting for the mark to appear on his skin. Never came. His howl of rage echoed through the palace for hours. "They say that suffering changes you. That's not quite right. Suffering reveals you. It strips away all the pretty lies you tell yourself about who you are and shows you the truth underneath." The truth I discovered was this. I was not my father's gentle daughter. I was not my mother's pious child. I was not the girl who used to read poetry in the garden and dream of marrying a kind man. I was rage-wearing skin. But I was also patient. And I was learning. From my cage, I memorized the patterns of the palace. Guard rotations. Secret passages. The names and loyalties of every courtier, every servant, every soldier. I learned which of Sebastian's advisors hated him, which ones feared him, which ones would betray him for the right price. I learned that his closest confidant, his most trusted general, was a man named Rodrigo de Salamanca. Rodrigo, who had fought beside Sebastian since they were both 15, who had killed for him, bled for him, loved him like a brother. I also learned that Rodrigo's sister, Esperanza, had been one of Sebastian's earliest victims, killed for refusing his advances. Rodrigo had never forgotten. I filed that information away. I also learned that Sebastian's obsession with the moon mark was destroying him. He consulted mystics, witches, blood mages. He performed rituals that left the throne room stinking of copper and smoke. He executed anyone who suggested that perhaps the mark was not meant for him. And every night, he would sit on his throne, and I would hear him whisper the same question to the darkness. "What more must I do?" The answer came on a night in late autumn, during my 2nd year of captivity. I was lying on my mat, half asleep, when I heard footsteps. Not Sebastian's. Lighter. Hesitant. A figure appeared at the edge of the crawlspace, crouching down to peer inside. It was a woman. Young, maybe 18. Dark eyes, copper skin, hair in a long braid. She wore the simple grey dress of a palace servant. "Are you Catalina de Monteverde?" she whispered. I hadn't heard my full name in so long that it took me a moment to remember how to nod. "My name is Ines," she said. "I work in the kitchens. I knew your mother. Before." My throat tightened. "I've been watching you," Ines continued. "Everyone has. Do you know what they call you? La Sombra del Trono. The shadow of the throne. They say you're a ghost. Curse. A reminder of all the king's sins." She reached through the gap and pressed something into my hand. Piece of bread still warm. "We haven't forgotten," she said. "The people who remember the old king, your father, your family. We're still here. And we're waiting." "Waiting for what?" Croaked. My voice was barely human after so many months of silence. "For a sign," she said. "For proof that the tyrant's reign will end." She disappeared before I could respond. But that night, for the first time in 2 years, I felt something other than rage. Felt hope. Time moves differently when you live in a cage. Days blur together. Weeks become indistinguishable. But certain moments burn themselves into your memory with perfect clarity. The night of the second lunar eclipse was one of those moments. I was in my 29th month of captivity. The palace was once again gathered in the courtyard, and once again Sebastian stood on his balcony, demanding that the goddess acknowledge him. I was alone beneath the throne. I had learned to cherish these moments of solitude, when the weight of his presence was lifted, even briefly. The moon began to darken. I watched through a crack in the marble as the shadow crossed the lunar surface, turning silver to copper to deep blood red. The courtyard fell silent. Sebastian's voice rang out, reciting some incantation he'd learned from one of his mages. And then I felt it. A burning sensation on my left shoulder blade. Sharp and sudden, like someone had pressed a brand into my skin. I gasped, reaching back, feeling the heat radiating from my flesh. When I pulled my hand away, my fingers were glowing with a faint silver light. No, this couldn't be happening. But the pain intensified, spreading across my shoulder in a pattern I could feel but not see. Crescent. A perfect crescent moon, burning itself into my skin. The moon mark. The goddess had chosen me. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming, from laughing, from crying all at once. Above me, Sebastian's incantation reached a fever pitch, then broke off into curses as once again, nothing happened. The mark on my shoulder pulsed with warmth, and with it came something else. Knowledge. Understanding. A sudden awareness of the world around me that I'd never possessed before. I could feel the guards in the courtyard, their hearts beating in unison. I could sense the fear and hatred simmering beneath the palace's surface. I could feel the very stone of the throne above me, ancient and patient, waiting for the right hand to command it. And I could feel Sebastian. His rage, his desperation. His terror that he would never be enough. For the first time in 3 years I smiled. Told no one. The mark was hidden beneath my torn dress, and I kept it that way. But everything had changed. The power that came with the mark was not immediate, not overwhelming. It was subtle, growing stronger each day like a muscle I was learning to use. I could sense emotions now. Not read minds exactly, but feel the truth beneath people's words. I could make suggestions, gentle nudges that people would follow without realizing they'd been influenced. And slowly, carefully I began to plan. Ines continued to visit me, bringing food, water, news from the outside world. Through her I made contact with others. Servants who despised the king. Guards who'd grown tired of executing innocents. Nobles who played at loyalty but secretly funded resistance movements. I built a network from my cage. I learned that Rodrigo de Salamanca was planning to leave the capital, disgusted by Sebastian's latest atrocity. The burning of an entire village accused of harboring rebels. Using Ines as my messenger, I sent word to Rodrigo. 3 words. I know everything. He came to me in the dead of night, crawling into the space beneath the throne with fury in his eyes. Who are you to threaten me? He hissed. I'm not threatening you, I said calmly. I'm offering you a chance at vengeance. For Esperanza. His face went white. How do you know that name? I've been under this throne for 3 years, General. I've heard everything. Every secret. Every sin. Every moment of weakness. And I know that you hate him as much as I do. Then we have something in common, he said bitterly. But what can you do about it? You're chained to the floor. Smiled. Not for much longer. I showed him the mark on my shoulder. For a long moment he just stared. Then he dropped to one knee. Tell me what you need, he said. The plan took 4 months to arrange. 4 months of whispered conversations, of carefully placed suggestions, of turning Sebastian's own court against him piece by piece. I convinced the royal treasurer that the king was planning to execute him for embezzlement. The treasurer, in turn, began siphoning funds to the resistance. I influenced the captain of the Lunar Guard to rotate his most loyal soldiers to distant outposts, replacing them with men whose families had been destroyed by Sebastian's purges. I sent dreams to the king himself, using the mark's power to slip into his sleeping mind and plant seeds of paranoia. He began to suspect everyone, trusting no one, which only accelerated his isolation. And all the while, I remained in my cage, the perfect invisible enemy. The night we chose for the uprising was the 3rd anniversary of my imprisonment. Poetic, perhaps, but also practical. Sebastian was hosting a great feast to celebrate his latest military victory, and the palace would be full of drunken nobles and distracted guards. Rodrigo came for me an hour after sunset. He had the key to my chains, stolen from the jailer. When the iron fell away from my ankle, I stood for the first time in 3 years without restraint. My legs nearly buckled, but Rodrigo caught me. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I can run," I said. We moved through the secret passages that I'd memorized from overheard conversations, passages that Sebastian thought only he knew about. Behind us, the uprising was beginning. Loyal guards were being subdued. Nobles who'd supported the resistance were arming themselves. The servants were barricading doors, trapping the king's most faithful supporters in the feast hall. We found Sebastian in his private chambers, staring at himself in a mirror, looking for a mark that would never come. He turned when we entered, and for a moment, confusion crossed his face. "Catalina," he said. "How did you?" Then he saw Rodrigo, and understanding dawned. "You treacherous bastard," he snarled, reaching for his sword. But I was faster. I raised my hand, and the moon mark blazed with silver light. Sebastian froze. His body locked in place by a power he'd spent years trying to claim. 3 years, I said, walking toward him. 3 years I spent in that cage listening to you. Do you know what I learned, Sebastian? He couldn't answer. Couldn't move. I learned that you're not cruel because you're strong. You're cruel because you're weak. You're terrified that if you stop killing, stop conquering, stop taking, someone will see that you're just a frightened boy playing at being king. I stopped in front of him, close enough to see the fear in his eyes. The goddess didn't choose you because you're not worthy, I continued. Not because of your bloodline or your birthright, but because you were never meant to lead. You were meant to serve as a warning. I released him from the paralysis, but kept my power wrapped around him like invisible chains. What are you going to do? He asked. Kill me. That would make you just like me. No, I said. I'm going to do something worse. I'm going to let you live. But not as a king. As a prisoner. In the same cage where you kept me. And every day, you're going to hear the footsteps of people walking above you, rebuilding the kingdom you destroyed. And you're going to know that you're powerless to stop it. Rodrigo stepped forward. The people will want his head. The people will have justice, I said. But not revenge. We've had enough blood. The restoration of Salandria took years. Rodrigo became my closest advisor, helping me navigate the politics of a traumatized nation. We released political prisoners, redistributed land stolen by Sebastian's cronies, rebuilt the villages he'd destroyed. And yes, I kept him alive, chained beneath a throne that I refused to sit on. Instead, I established a council of representatives, each chosen by their provinces. I used the moon mark's power not to rule, but to unite, to heal. Sometimes I would visit him in his cage. He aged poorly, as cruel men often do. His hair went gray, his body bent. Do you ever regret it? He asked me once. Not killing me when you had the chance. I considered the question. No, I said. Because this is a better punishment than death. You have to live with what you've done. You have to watch the world move on without you. He laughed bitterly. You've become just as cold as I was. No, I said. I've become something you never were. I've become free. 20 years have passed since the night the moon mark chose me. Sebastian died 5 years ago, alone in his cage, unmourned. The kingdom flourishes now. We've built schools, hospitals, systems of justice that treat everyone equally. The scars of his reign are fading, though they'll never fully disappear. The mark on my shoulder no longer burns. Its power has become a part of me, as natural as breathing. I use it sparingly, only when necessary, always remembering that power is a gift that can become a curse if you forget why you have it. People sometimes ask me if I ever wanted revenge. If those 3 years in the cage filled me with hatred that I'm still carrying. The truth is more complicated. Yes, I hated him. Yes, part of me will always carry the scars of what he did to my family, to me, to thousands of others. But I also learned something in that cage that he never understood. The opposite of tyranny isn't revenge. It's mercy. It's choosing to be better than the people who hurt you. It's refusing to let their cruelty reshape you into something monstrous. The goddess didn't choose me because I was perfect. She chose me because I survived. Because I refused to let darkness extinguish my light. Because I learned that true power isn't about dominance or control. It's about liberation. Mine and everyone else's. So that's my story. 3 years chained under a throne, and the lifetime that came after. The mark the moon goddess gave me wasn't just a symbol of power. It was a reminder that even in the darkest places, even when you're trapped and helpless and afraid, you still have choices. You can let the darkness consume you, or you can hold on to who you are and wait for the moment when you can rise. My moment came. I don't know when yours will come. But I promise you this. It will come. And when it does, you'll have to choose what kind of person you want to be. What kind of power you want to claim. Choose wisely. Choose mercy. Choose freedom. Choose to be the light that someone else needs in their darkness. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug. And please subscribe to this channel because I have more stories to share. Stories about survival, about power, about the choices that define us. Hit that like button if Catalina's journey inspired you, and remember, you are stronger than you know, and your moment is coming. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. Until next time, stay strong, stay free, and never ever give up. Part 2. The weight of the crown I never wanted. You're still here. But, 'cause what I told you before, that was only half the truth. If you're new to this channel, welcome. Please subscribe and hit that notification bell because the stories I share here are about real transformation, real power, and real choices. And if you've been with me from the beginning, thank you. Now let me tell you what happened after the throne room went silent. They wanted to make me queen. The council, the people, Rodrigo, even Ines, who'd risked everything to bring me food in that cage. They all believed the moon mark meant I was destined to rule. That the goddess had chosen me not just to overthrow Sebastian, but to replace him. I stood in the throne room 3 days after his imprisonment, looking at the marble seat I'd lived beneath for 3 years, and I felt sick. I can't, I told Rodrigo. I won't. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Catalina, the kingdom needs a leader. Someone the people trust. Someone with legitimate power. The kingdom needs healing, I corrected. Not another person sitting on a throne making decisions for everyone else. That's what rulers do, he said, frustration creeping into his voice. And that's exactly the problem. We argued for hours. He brought nobles, generals, even common people who begged me to take the crown. They told me I was different from Sebastian, that I understood suffering, that I would be fair. But I'd learned something in that cage that they hadn't. Power doesn't corrupt people. People corrupt power. And the surest way to become a tyrant is to convince yourself you're different from all the other tyrants who came before you. So I made a choice that confused everyone. I agreed to lead, but only for 5 years. And I refused to be called queen. I would be La Guardiana, the guardian. My job wasn't to rule, but to guide the kingdom through its transition to something new. Something that had never been tried in Salandria's 1,000-year history. A government by the people. For the people. Rodrigo thought I was insane. Most of the nobles agreed with him. But the servants, the farmers, the merchants, the soldiers who'd been conscripted and sent to die in Sebastian's wars, they understood. They'd lived under boots for too long. They didn't want another boot, even if it was gentler. They wanted to stand on their own feet. The first year was chaos. Nobles who'd expected me to simply redistribute power among them instead found their estates examined. their wealth scrutinized. Those who'd grown rich through Sebastian's corruption lost everything. Those who'd quietly resisted, who'd hidden refugees or funneled money to the resistance, were honored. I used the moon mark's power carefully, always asking myself, is this necessary? Am I influencing this person because it's right, or because it's easy? The mark could make people agree with me, could make them see things my way. But every time I used it like that, I felt myself sliding toward something dark, something familiar. So I established a rule for myself. I would only use the mark's power to sense truth and lies, never to compel action. People had to choose their own path, even if they chose wrong. And they did choose wrong sometimes. There was Lord Alonso de Vargas, a minor noble who'd lost his lands when I discovered he'd been selling peasants' children to labor camps. He gathered supporters, tried to organize a coup 6 months into my guardianship. They were going to assassinate me during a public gathering in the capital square. I knew about it 3 weeks in advance. The mark let me sense the conspiracy spreading like poison through the court. Rodrigo wanted to arrest everyone involved immediately. No, I said. Let them come. You'll be killed, he argued. I'll be ready, I said. But if we arrest them before they act, we look paranoid. Like Sebastian. We need the people to see that we're different. That we don't rule through fear. The day of the gathering came. 5,000 people packed into the square to hear me speak about the new constitution we were drafting. I saw Alonso and his conspirators in the crowd. Hands hidden beneath their cloaks, murder in their hearts. I let them get within 10 feet of me. Then I used the mark not to control them, but to amplify my voice so everyone in the square could hear me clearly. Lord Alonso de Vargas, I said, looking directly at him. You and your companions have come here today planning to kill me. You're angry because I took away your right to exploit children. Your right to grow rich on suffering. The crowd gasped. Alonso's face went white, then red with rage. I could stop you, I continued. I have the power to freeze you where you stand, to command you to drop your weapons. But I'm not going to do that. Because the people of Salandria need to see what I am, and what you are. They need to make their own choice. I spread my arms wide, making myself vulnerable. So here I am, Alonso. Unarmed. Unprotected. If you believe your way is better than mine, if you truly think this kingdom would be improved by my death, then act. Show everyone who you really are. For a moment I thought he might actually do it. His hand went to the knife under his cloak. But the crowd had already moved. Not soldiers. Not guards. Regular people, farmers and bakers and blacksmiths, stepping between us. Creating a wall of bodies protecting me not because I'd commanded it, but because they'd chosen it. Alonso looked around at 5,000 hostile faces and realized he'd lost before he'd even begun. He dropped the knife and ran. I let him go. He fled to the neighboring kingdom of Valtierra and spent the rest of his life writing bitter manifestos about my tyranny that no one read. But the people of Salandria, they never forgot that day. The day their guardian trusted them to save her, and they did. The second year brought different challenges. A plague swept through the southern provinces. A drought devastated the eastern farmlands. And worst of all, a rebellion started brewing in the northern mountains, led by a man named Esteban de Rojas. Esteban had been one of Sebastian's victims too. The king had executed his entire family for the crime of practicing the old religion, the worship of the moon goddess that Sebastian had tried to eradicate and replace with worship of himself. When news of my guardianship reached the mountains, Esteban sent messengers. The moon mark chose you, they said. That makes you the goddess's voice on earth. You should restore the old faith. Make it the kingdom's official religion. Punish those who turned away from her. I invited Esteban to the capital to discuss it in person. He came with 50 followers, all of them believers, all of them scarred by Sebastian's religious persecutions. They looked at me like I was salvation itself. We met in the same throne room where I'd been imprisoned, though I'd long since had the throne removed and replaced with a simple table and chairs. The goddess chose you for a reason, Esteban said. his eyes burning with fervor. To return her worship to its rightful place. To punish the heretics who abandoned her. The goddess chose me, I agreed. But not to create a new tyranny. Sebastian forced people to worship him. You want me to force them to worship her? How is that different? Because she's real, Esteban said, gesturing at the mark on my shoulder, visible through the open-back dress I'd taken to wearing as a symbol of transparency. You're living proof. I'm proof that she exists, I said. Not proof that everyone must worship her. Faith that's compelled isn't faith at all. It's just obedience wearing a mask. His face darkened. So you'll allow the heretics to continue their blasphemy? I'll allow people to choose their own relationship with the divine, I said. Including choosing to have no relationship at all. The goddess gave humans free will. Who am I to take it away? He stood abruptly. Then you've betrayed her. Betrayed all of us who suffered for our faith. I've honored her, I said quietly, by refusing to use her name as a weapon. Just like Sebastian did. Esteban and his followers left the capital that night. Within a month, they declared the northern mountains an independent theocracy. They raided villages, forcing conversions, executing anyone who refused. They did it all in the goddess's name. And they claimed I was a false prophet. Rodrigo wanted to send the army immediately. These are terrorists, he said. Fanatics. They're destroying everything we've built. They're traumatized people lashing out, I countered. Esteban watched his children burn. Can you blame him for losing himself? I don't blame him, Rodrigo said. But I won't let him destroy innocent lives because of his pain. He was right, of course. But sending soldiers felt like admitting failure. Like proving that violence was still the answer. So I went myself. Alone. Rodrigo nearly had a heart attack. The council tried to stop me. But I used the one advantage I had that no army could provide. I bore the goddess's mark. Even Esteban couldn't deny that. I rode into the mountains on a white horse, wearing simple traveling clothes, carrying no weapons. Esteban's scouts found me within hours and brought me to his camp. He'd fortified a monastery, turning it into a fortress. Hundreds of followers surrounded me, all of them angry, all of them certain I was an enemy. Esteban met me in the monastery's chapel, standing before an altar where the moon goddess's statue wept silver tears. You came to stop me, he said. I came to understand you, I replied. We talked for 3 days. Not as enemies. Not as leader and rebel. Just as two people who'd survived the same nightmare and come out different shapes. I didn't try to convince him he was wrong. Instead I listened. Really listened. To his pain, his rage. His desperate need to make meaning from the suffering he'd endured. And slowly he began to listen too. What you're doing in the villages, I finally said on the 3rd day. Forcing conversions, executing resistors. Does that feel like worship to you? Or does it feel like revenge? His hands trembled. I don't know anymore. I think you do, I said gently. I think you know that the goddess wouldn't want this. That your children wouldn't want this. That you're becoming the thing you hate most. He broke down then, weeping like a child, and I held him the way no one had held me in that cage. The way we all needed to be held. When we emerged from the chapel, I made him an offer. Come back to the capital, I said. Not as a prisoner. As a voice. Help us build a kingdom where what happened to your family can never happen again. Where people are free to worship or not worship, but never forced. He looked at his followers, then back at me. And if I refuse? Then I'll have to stop you, I said. And we'll both lose. He chose to come back. Not all of his followers agreed. Some stayed in the mountains, continuing their rebellion. But without Esteban's leadership, the movement eventually collapsed. The man himself became one of my most valuable advisors, representing religious communities in the new government we were building. He never stopped mourning his family, but he stopped using his pain as permission to hurt others. That, I learned, was the real work of healing. By the third year, the constitution was nearly complete. We'd held assemblies in every province, inviting citizens to voice their concerns, their hopes, their visions for the future. Nobles hated it because they were losing their absolute power. But the common people finally had a say in their own governance. The document we created wasn't perfect. It gave too much power to landowners in some areas, too little protection to minorities in others. But it was alive, changeable, growing, and it established something revolutionary. The Guardian would serve for only 5 years, then step down. Forever. "You're making yourself obsolete," Rodrigo observed. "Exactly," I said. But the mark had other plans. In my third year I started having dreams. Not nightmares exactly, but visions. The goddess herself, standing beneath a silver moon, speaking directly to me. "Your work is not finished," she said. "The mark chose you for more than Salandria." I woke from these dreams covered in sweat, the mark on my shoulder burning like it had the night it first appeared. "More than Salandria," I said aloud in my empty chambers. "What does that mean?" The answer came 3 months later when ambassadors arrived from the kingdom of Montpellier, 200 miles to the south. Their king, Alfonso IV, had died suddenly. His son, Prince Miguel, was only 14 years old, and the court was already tearing itself apart in a succession crisis. 3 different nobles claimed regency. The kingdom was on the brink of civil war. "We've heard about the Guardian of Salandria," the ambassadors said. "About the moon mark. About what you did here. We're asking you to help us." I wanted to refuse. Salandria needed me. We were still rebuilding, still fragile. But the mark burned on my shoulder, and I knew. This was why the goddess had chosen me. Not just to fix one broken kingdom, but to teach others how to fix themselves. I spent the next year traveling between Salandria and Montpellier, helping them establish their own council system, their own constitution. Young Prince Miguel, wise beyond his years, became not a king but a symbolic leader, while real power resided with elected representatives. The nobles fought it every step of the way. There were 3 assassination attempts, 2 bribes, 1 very awkward marriage proposal from a duke who thought he could control me. But slowly, painfully, Montpellier transformed. And other kingdoms noticed. By my 4th year as guardian, I'd received requests from 7 different nations. Delegations wanting to learn our system. Rulers asking for advice. Revolutionary movements seeking legitimacy. The moon mark, it turned out, was less about power and more about responsibility. The goddess hadn't given me the ability to command so I could rule. She'd given it to me so I could teach people to rule themselves. I traveled constantly, never staying in one place long. Rodrigo managed Salandria's day-to-day governance, preparing for the first elections that would replace me when my 5 years ended. And everywhere I went I told the same story. The story of a girl chained under a throne who learned that true power isn't about domination. It's about liberation. Some people listened. Others didn't. I couldn't control that, and I'd learned not to try. All I could do was plant seeds and trust that some of them would grow. The 5th year arrived faster than I expected. Salandria held its first free elections on a warm day in late spring. Thousands of citizens voted, choosing representatives from their own communities. Not nobles, not warriors. Farmers, teachers, blacksmiths, merchants. People who understood what normal life required. Rodrigo won a seat on the council, representing the military district. Ines, my friend from the kitchens, won a seat representing the service workers. Esteban represented religious communities. And I, as promised, stepped down. There was a ceremony, of course. People wanted to honor me, to thank me, to build statues and name streets after me. I refused most of it, though I did agree to one thing. They wanted to mark the crawlspace beneath where the throne had been. Not as a memorial to my suffering, but as a reminder. "So we never forget," Ines said. "What happens when we give one person all the power?" We placed a plaque there, engraved with words I'd written. "Here lived a prisoner of tyranny. May all who govern remember. Power is a gift from the people, not a right to rule over them." The throne is empty. Keep it that way. 10 years have passed since I stepped down as guardian. I'm 46 years old now, and I live a quiet life in a small cottage on the border between Salandria and Montpellier. Keep bees. I write letters to the various councils and governments that still seek my advice. I train young people who want to learn how to use the mark responsibly, because yes, the goddess has chosen others since me. Not many, but enough. Sebastian died 5 years ago, as I mentioned before. When the guards came to tell me, I felt nothing. No triumph. No relief. Just a quiet acknowledgement that a sad chapter had finally closed. I visited his cage one last time before they sealed it forever. The space looked smaller than I remembered, though I knew it was exactly the same size. You were right about one thing, I said to the empty darkness. Power does change people. But not the way you thought. It doesn't have to make them into monsters. Sometimes it makes them into something better. The mark on my shoulder pulsed once, warmly, in agreement. People still ask me questions. They write to me, visit me, seek guidance. The most common question is always the same. How do I know if I'm using my power correctly? My answer never changes. Ask yourself who benefits. If the answer is you're probably using it wrong. If the answer is everyone, including people who oppose you, you might be on the right track. The second most common question is harder. How do you live with what was done to you? Because trauma doesn't just disappear when you're freed. The chains around my ankle are gone, but I still feel them sometimes, especially in dreams. I still wake up in the night thinking I'm back in that crawl space, hearing Sebastian's voice above me. The answer I've learned is this. You don't get over trauma. You learn to carry it differently. You integrate it into who you are without letting it define you. You acknowledge the wound while refusing to let it be your only story. I was a prisoner for 3 years. But I've been free for 23. I refuse to let those 3 years be more important than these 23. Last month, a young woman came to my cottage. She couldn't have been more than 20, with frightened eyes and a desperate energy. Are you Catalina de Monteverdi? She asked. That's what they used to call me, I said. These days I'm just Catalina. Would you like some tea? We sat in my garden while she told me her story. She was from Valtierra, the kingdom where Alonso had fled. Their current monarch was cruel, paranoid, violent. Her family had been imprisoned for criticizing him. She'd barely escaped with her life. I heard what you did in Salandria, she said. How you overthrew a tyrant. How you changed everything. I need you to help me do the same. I looked at this young woman, so full of rage and righteousness and pain, and I saw myself at 16, before the cage, before the mark, before I learned that revolution is easy but healing is hard. I can't overthrow your king, I said gently. That's not my role anymore. Her face fell. But the moon mark. The mark chose me to teach, not to conquer, I interrupted. And the first thing I need to teach you is this. You can't create lasting change through violence alone. I didn't defeat Sebastian by killing him. I defeated him by building something better. But how? She asked, tears streaming down her face. How do I fight someone with all the power? The same way I did, I said. You start small. You build networks. You help people remember their own power. You refuse to become the monster you're fighting, even when it would be easier. Even when it would feel justified. I spent the next 3 hours sharing everything I'd learned. The mistakes I'd made. The compromises that had worked and the ones that hadn't. The importance of patience, coalition building, and knowing when to push and when to wait. When she finally left, she looked different. Still afraid, still hurt, but no longer drowning in rage. Will you come if I need you? She asked at the door. I'll come if you need me, I promised. But I suspect you won't. You're stronger than you know. You all are. So here's the truth I never told you at the beginning. The truth that took me decades to understand. The moon mark didn't choose me because I was special. It chose me because I was willing. Willing to suffer without breaking. Willing to gain power without being corrupted by it. willing to teach others to be free rather than ruling over them. And the real gift the goddess gave me wasn't the power to influence minds or sense emotions or freeze people in place. It was the wisdom to know when not to use that power. Every day I could reach out with the mark and reshape the world according to my will. I could ensure that no one ever made decisions I disagreed with. I could create a perfect society by forcing everyone to be good. But that wouldn't be freedom. It would just be a prettier cage. The goddess didn't choose me to rule the world. She chose me to teach the world to rule itself. And that work never ends. There will always be tyrants. Always be people who believe their pain gives them permission to hurt others. Always be systems that concentrate power in the hands of the few while leaving the many to suffer. But there will also always be people willing to resist. To build. To imagine something better and work toward it even when it seems impossible. I was one of those people. You might be too. Sometimes late at night I go back to the palace. They've turned it into a museum now. A memorial to everything that happened during Sebastian's reign and everything that came after. I stand in the throne room. They rebuilt it exactly as it was, including the crawlspace beneath where the throne stood. Children visit on school trips. They crawl into the space, trying to imagine spending 3 years there. They always emerge wide-eyed, unable to comprehend it. How did you survive? They ask me when they recognize who I am. And I tell them the truth. I survived because I refused to let him take my humanity. I survived because I held on to hope even when hope seemed stupid. I survived because I believed that someday, somehow, things would be different. Then I show them the mark on my shoulder, still glowing faintly silver even after all these years. And I survived because the universe has a funny way of rewarding stubborn resistance. I add with a smile. They laugh, those children. They can't imagine living in a world like the one I grew up in. They've only known democracy, only known freedom. That's how I know we won. Not because we defeated Sebastian, but because we created a world where children can't even imagine his kind of tyranny. That's the real victory. I don't know how much longer I'll live. The mark has extended my life somewhat. I should probably be grayer and more bent than I am. But I'm mortal like everyone else. Someday, the mark will pass to someone else, and I'll finally rest. When that day comes, I hope I've done enough. Not to be remembered as a hero. I never wanted that. But to have made the world just a little bit better than I found it. To have proven that cages can be broken. That tyrants can fall. That the most powerful thing you can do with power is give it away. So that's the rest of the story. The part about what comes after the revolution, after the dramatic moment when the chains fall off. Because that's when the real work begins. That's when you have to decide what kind of person, what kind of world you want to create. If this story meant something to you, please let me know in the comments. Tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug. Share your own stories of resistance, of survival, of the moments when you chose to be better than your circumstances. And subscribe to this channel because I believe these stories matter. I believe we all need reminders that change is possible, that power doesn't have to corrupt, that even the darkest nights eventually give way to dawn. Hit that like button if you believe like I do, that the future doesn't have to look like the past, that we can build something new, something better, something free. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing that one person, even a chained prisoner with nothing but stubborn hope, can change the world. Until next time, stay strong, stay free, and remember, the throne is empty. Keep it that way. Part 3. The price of being chosen. You're still here. That means you want to know the parts I've been avoiding. The parts that don't fit neatly into stories about triumph and transformation. The parts that keep me awake at night even now, 23 years after I walked out of that cage. If this is your first time here, please subscribe. What I'm about to share isn't comfortable, but it's true. And if you've stayed with me through 2 parts already, then you deserve the whole truth. Now let me tell you about the cost of the moon mark. The price the goddess never mentioned when she burned her symbol into my flesh. There's a moment that haunts me more than any other. It happened in my 4th year as guardian, during a diplomatic visit to the kingdom of Celestria. I was there to help mediate a dispute between two provinces that were on the brink of war over water rights. The negotiations had gone well. We'd reached an agreement that both sides could accept. I was staying in the royal guest house, finally allowing myself to relax, when a servant girl came to my room. She couldn't have been more than 15. Thin, with scared eyes and bruises on her wrists that she tried to hide under her sleeves. "Guardian Catalina," she whispered. "I need your help." I invited her in. She told me her story in a voice that shook like leaves in a storm. The lord of the Eastern Province, the same man I'd just spent 3 days negotiating with, the man who'd seemed so reasonable and diplomatic. He kept young girls as slaves. He called them servants, but they weren't free to leave. He used them in ways that made my stomach turn. "There are 12 of us," she said. "Some as young as 11. Please. You have the moon mark. You have power. Make him stop." I believed her instantly. The mark let me sense truth, and every word she spoke rang like a bell. But I was a diplomat there. A guest. I had no authority in Celestria. No legal standing to intervene. And the treaty I just negotiated would save thousands of lives by preventing a water war that would devastate both provinces. If I accused the Lord, if I tried to use my power to force him to release the girls, the treaty would collapse. He'd withdraw his cooperation. The provinces would go to war. Thousands would die. 12 girls or thousands of people. The math was simple. The morality wasn't. I did what I could within the constraints. I convinced the Celestrian Queen to launch a quiet investigation. I provided testimony about what I'd been told. I used my diplomatic weight to push for stronger protections for servants throughout the kingdom. But the Lord was powerful, well-connected. The investigation moved slowly. By the time charges were brought, he'd already moved the girls somewhere else. Hidden them or killed them or sold them. I never found out which. That girl who came to me. She disappeared 3 days after our conversation. I never saw her again. The treaty, though. The treaty held. The provinces didn't go to war. Thousands of lives were saved by the stable water-sharing agreement we'd reached. I tell myself that means I made the right choice. But late at night, I still see her face. Still hear her whisper. "You have power. Make him stop." And I wonder if the girl I used to be, the one chained under the throne, would have been proud of the woman I became. Or if she would have been disgusted that I learned to calculate in lives, to weigh suffering against suffering and choose the lesser evil. The moon mark gave me power. But power, I learned, is often just another word for impossible choices. There's another thing people don't understand about the mark. It's alive. Not in a literal sense, but in the way it grows, changes, demands. The longer I carried it, the stronger it became. And the stronger it became, the more it wanted to be used. Sometimes I would be in a meeting with the council, listening to them argue about some policy, and I would feel the mark warming on my shoulder, suggesting, whispering, "You could make them agree. You could end this argument in seconds. Just a small push. They'd never even know. It would be so easy. A subtle influence, a gentle nudge toward consensus. Everyone would leave happy. The work would get done faster. And no one would ever know I'd taken away their choice." That's the real danger of power. Not that it corrupts you all at once, but that it corrupts you gradually. One small compromise at a time. One justified exception after another. This is important enough. They're being unreasonable. I know better. It's for their own good. That's how Sebastian started, I'm sure. With good intentions and small violations that seemed justified at the time. So I made rules for myself. Rigid rules that I refused to break, even when breaking them would have been easier, faster, better. I would never use the mark to compel action, only to sense truth. I would never make decisions alone that affected others. I would never use my power to win an argument or settle a personal dispute. I would always ask, am I doing this because it's right or because I can? But rules are easy in theory. In practice, they're torture. In my second year as guardian, there was a man named Tomás de Escalante. A factory owner who ran workshops where people made textiles. He paid starvation wages, worked his employees 16 hours a day, fired anyone who complained. Technically, it wasn't illegal. Immoral, exploitative, cruel, but not illegal. I visited his factory as part of a tour of industrial centers. I saw children working the looms, their fingers bleeding. I saw adults collapsing from exhaustion. I saw Tomas himself, fat and smug, showing me around like he was proud of his efficiency. The mark burned on my shoulder. Hot and angry and demanding. Make him pay them fairly. You have the power. Use it. But I couldn't. Because once I started using the mark to enforce my personal sense of morality, where would it stop? Who decides what's fair? Who decides what's right? Instead, I went back to the capital and worked with the council for 8 months to pass labor protection laws. Minimum wage. Maximum hours. Safety standards. Enforcement mechanisms. It was slow. It was frustrating. And during those 8 months, people suffered in Tomas's factory and dozens of others like it. But when the laws finally passed, they weren't my laws. They were everyone's laws. Created through debate, compromise, democratic process. Tomas fought them, of course. Took his case all the way to the High Court. But the laws stood. And eventually, grudgingly, he complied. No one died in the making of those laws. No one was mind-controlled or compelled. The change came through the collective will of the people, not the individual power of a marked guardian. It was slower. It was harder. But it was real. Still, I think about those 8 months sometimes. About the children who were working while I was negotiating and compromising and following process. I tell myself I did the right thing. But the mark whispers that I could have done the fast thing. And some nights, I'm not sure which is true. The hardest part of carrying the moon mark wasn't the power itself. It was the loneliness. People who knew about the mark treated me differently. They were afraid of me or worshipful of me or both. They couldn't separate Catalina the person from Catalina the chosen one. I had friends, Rodrigo, Ines, Esteban, others. But even they kept a certain distance. They would never fully disagree with me. Never truly challenge me. There was always that awareness between us. She could influence my mind if she wanted to. I never would. But they didn't know that for certain. How could they? So I was alone in a room full of people. Powerful and isolated in equal measure. I tried to have relationships. Romantic ones, I mean. There was a scholar named Lorenzo who taught history at the university. Kind, brilliant, completely uninterested in politics or power. We spent 6 months together, and I thought maybe, finally, I'd found someone who could see past the mark. Then one night he told me he loved me, and I felt the mark pulse. Just once. Just a tiny flutter of warmth. And I realized, I would never know if his feelings were real or if the mark had influenced him somehow without me even realizing. I would never be certain that any emotion directed at me was genuine, and not just a response to the divine power radiating from my shoulder. I ended things the next day. He didn't understand. Couldn't explain. After that I stopped trying. The goddess chose me for a purpose, but she didn't promise that purpose would make me happy. In my 5th year, just before I stepped down, a young man came to the capital from a remote farming village. His name was Gabriel, and he bore the moon mark on his left hand. The goddess had chosen him 3 weeks earlier, during a lunar eclipse that I'd barely noticed because I was so busy with the transition of power. He found me in my office, wild-eyed and terrified. "Make it stop," he begged. "I can hear everyone's thoughts, feel everyone's emotions. Too much. It's driving me mad. Please, you have to know how to make it stop." I looked at this boy. He was only 17, and I saw myself at 16. Before I learned control. Before I understood what the mark required. "It doesn't stop," I said gently. "But you learn to manage it." Sit. Let me teach you what I've learned. I spent 3 months training Gabriel. Teaching him to build mental walls, to filter the noise, to use the mark's power with intention rather than being overwhelmed by it. But I also told him something I'd never told anyone else. "The mark is a gift and a curse," I said. It will give you power beyond imagining, but it will also separate you from everyone you love. It will let you change the world, but it will change you in the process. And you will spend the rest of your life wondering if you're using it well enough, responsibly enough, if you're worthy of what the goddess gave you. He looked at me with those young, frightened eyes. Is it worth it? He asked. I thought about 3 years in a cage. About 23 years of impossible choices. About the thousands of lives saved and the individual lives I couldn't save. About the loneliness and the responsibility and the constant grinding weight of knowing that people expected you to be better than human because you carried a divine mark. I don't know, I said honestly. Ask me when I'm dying. Maybe I'll have an answer by then. Gabriel stayed with me for 6 months, learning everything I could teach him. Then he returned to his village and began his own journey with the mark. I hear about him sometimes. He's doing good work, helping his community, resisting the temptation to rule. The goddess chose well with him. But I also hear the exhaustion in the reports. The way people expect miracles from him. The way he's becoming isolated, set apart. The mark chooses us, but it never asks if we want to be chosen. There's one more thing I need to tell you. The darkest thing. The thing I've never admitted to anyone. In my 3rd year as guardian, there was a moment when I almost became Sebastian. There was a rebellion in the Western territories. Not like Esteban's religious uprising. This was pure banditry dressed up as revolution. A warlord named Cristobal had gathered an army of criminals and displaced soldiers. They were raiding villages, raping, murdering, claiming they were fighting against my tyranny. I sent negotiators. They were returned in pieces. I sent offers of amnesty. Cristobal burned them and sent back a message written in blood. Come and stop me yourself, guardian. Or prove you're as weak as your precious democracy. So I went. I rode out with a small military escort to Cristobal's stronghold. He met me in a burned-out village square, surrounded by his men, confident that I couldn't touch him without becoming the tyrant he claimed I was. You can't stop me without violence, he said, grinning. And if you use violence, you're no different from the old kings. You lose either way. He was right. And that's when I felt it. The mark burning on my shoulder, offering me a solution. I could kill him. Not with swords or soldiers, but with the mark itself. Stop his heart. Burst something in his brain. The power was there, ready, eager. And no one would know. They'd think he'd had a stroke, a sudden illness. I would be free of this problem, and my hands would appear clean. For one long, terrible moment I wanted to do it. Not because it was necessary, but because he'd made me angry. Because he'd challenged my authority. Because he'd made me feel helpless. And the mark was offering me a way to feel powerful again. Came so close. The power gathered in my chest, ready to release. I looked at Cristobal's smug face and thought, he deserves this. Then I looked at his men. Scared boys, most of them. Orphaned by the war Sebastian had started. Left with no options but banditry. They didn't deserve to watch their leader die mysteriously at my hands. They didn't deserve to live in fear of invisible, divine violence. And I didn't deserve to become an executioner. I released the power. Let it dissipate. Instead, I spoke to Cristobal's men. Not to him, to them. I know why you're here, I said. I know what Sebastian's wars took from you. I know you're angry and desperate and afraid. But this man is using your pain to justify his cruelty. He's making you into monsters so he can feel powerful. Is that really what you want? Is that really who you want to be? I spoke for 2 hours. Not with divine persuasion. Just with truth and compassion and a genuine understanding of their suffering. And slowly, one by one, his men lowered their weapons. Cristobal tried to rally them, but he'd lost. Not to my power but to my humanity. In the end, his own lieutenant arrested him. They turned him over to the courts, where he was tried and convicted and imprisoned. No divine intervention. No mysterious deaths. Just people choosing to be better than their circumstances. But here's what haunts me. I came so close to killing him. So close to crossing that line. And part of me, a small dark part that I hate to acknowledge, was disappointed that I didn't. 'Cause it would have been so much easier. That's the truth about power. It's always whispering that there's an easier way, faster way. A way that doesn't require patience or faith or trust in other people. The mark gave me the power to reshape the world with a thought. My humanity required me not to. And the tension between those two things never goes away. Not after 5 years. Not after 20. Not ever. So why am I telling you all this? Why am I admitting to the failures, the doubts, the dark moments when I almost became the thing I fought against? 'Cause I think we need different kinds of heroes. We need stories about people who have power and choose not to use it. About people who make mistakes and learn from them. About people who win not through strength but through restraint. We're told that power is about dominance. About bending the world to your will. About having the strength to defeat your enemies. But real power, the kind that actually changes things, that creates lasting good, is about knowing when to act and when to step back. When to fight and when to compromise. When to use your gifts and when to trust others to use theirs. The moon mark gave me abilities beyond measure. But the most important thing I learned had nothing to do with the mark. I learned that the purpose of power is to make itself unnecessary. Every time I used the mark to solve a problem, I was teaching people that they needed someone with divine power to save them. But every time I stepped back and let them solve their own problems, I was teaching them that they had power too. It was harder, slower, but it was sustainable. Because I'm not immortal. The mark will pass to someone else eventually. And when it does, the people need to know they can govern themselves, solve their problems, create their futures without waiting for a chosen one to save them. That's the real revolution. Not replacing one ruler with a better ruler, but making rulers obsolete. I'm 56 years old now. Yes, 10 more years have passed since I last updated you. Time moves strangely when you're trying to capture it in words. The mark is fading. Can feel it. The burns on my shoulder are less bright, the power less responsive. The goddess is preparing to choose someone new. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of leaving the work unfinished. Because there's always more work. More kingdoms that need guidance. More tyrants who need overthrowing. More people who need to learn that they're powerful enough to save themselves. I've trained 16 people now who carry the moon mark in various kingdoms across the known world. 16 people learning to use divine power responsibly, to resist the temptation to rule, to teach rather than command. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's something. And sometimes something is all we get. Last week, I received a letter from Salandria. They're celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Constitution. 20 years of democracy, of people governing themselves, of slow, messy, imperfect progress. The council invited me to attend the celebration. They want to honor me, probably build another statue I'll have to talk them out of. I'm going to go. Not to be honored, but to remind them. To remind them that the throne is still empty and must stay that way. To remind them that democracy is a daily choice, not a permanent achievement. To remind them that vigilance is the price of freedom, and that price must be paid over and over again, generation after generation. But most of all, I'm going to stand in that throne room, in front of that sealed crawlspace, and I'm going to remember the girl I was at 16. Broken. Game. Powerless. I'm going to thank her for not giving up. For holding on just one more day, then one more after that, until those days became years and those years became a lifetime. I'm going to tell her that it was worth it. All of it. Even the hard parts. Even the lonely parts. Even the parts where I failed. Because she, that scared, angry, grief-stricken girl in the darkness beneath a tyrant's throne, she changed the world. Not because a goddess chose her, but because she chose herself. Every single day she chose to remain human. To hold on to hope. To believe that power should serve rather than rule. And in the end, that choice mattered more than any divine mark ever could. So here's what I want you to understand, whoever you are, wherever you're watching from. You don't need a goddess to choose you. You don't need a magical mark or divine power or supernatural abilities. You just need to make a choice. Every day. To be better than your circumstances. To resist the easy path of cruelty and dominance. To build instead of destroy. To teach instead of control. To trust instead of command. The world is full of cages. Some are made of iron. Some are made of systems and structures and traditions that tell us we're powerless. But the cages are never as strong as they seem. And you're never as powerless as they want you to believe. I lived chained under a throne for 3 years. But I was free the moment I decided that he could own my body but never my soul. You're free too. Right now. Reading this. You just have to choose it. And keep choosing it. Every single day. That's the real story. Not about a goddess or a magical mark or a dramatic overthrow of a tyrant. But about daily choices compounded over time. About resisting corruption when you have power and resisting despair when you don't. About building slowly and patiently instead of destroying quickly and dramatically. If this story has moved you, challenged you, or changed something in how you see power and responsibility, please leave a comment. Tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug. And more importantly, tell me about your own cages. The ones you've escaped. The ones you're still working on. The ones you're helping others escape. Subscribe to this channel because these are the stories we need. Not fantasies about perfect heroes, but truths about flawed humans doing their best. Not myths about power but realities about responsibility. Hit that like button if you believe, like I do, that the most revolutionary act is choosing restraint when you have the power to dominate. That the bravest thing is building systems that don't need heroes. That the truest strength is admitting you're afraid and doing the right thing anyway. Thank you for staying with me through 3 parts. Through the triumph and the doubt and the messy truth of what it really means to be chosen. The throne is empty. Keep it that way. And remember, you don't need a goddess to choose you. You just need to choose yourself. Every day. Starting now. Part 4. What the goddess never told me. I lied to you. Not about the facts, those are all true. But about the ending. I told you the story was over. That I'd learned my lessons and found my peace. That I was living quietly in my cottage, dispensing wisdom to the next generation of mark-bearers. But 3 months ago everything changed. And I need to tell you what happened when the goddess finally spoke to me directly. If you've made it this far, you're part of something now. This journey we're on together. So please subscribe if you haven't already, because what I'm about to share will challenge everything I've told you before. Drop a comment and tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug. Because after this story, we're all going to need one. Started with the dreams. Not the visions I'd had before. Those were distant, symbolic, the goddess appearing as an abstract figure beneath a silver moon. These dreams were different. Visceral. Immediate. I was back in the cage under the throne. But this time I wasn't 16. I was 56, with all my memories intact. Feeling every moment of those 3 years compressed into a single night of sleeping. When I woke, my ankle bore fresh wounds as if the chains had been real. The mark on my shoulder, which had been fading for years, burned bright as the day it first appeared. And I heard a voice I'd never heard before, though I'd carried her symbol for 23 years. Catalina de Monteverdi. We need to talk. I don't know what I expected the goddess to sound like. Something ethereal, perhaps. Ancient and otherworldly. Instead, she sounded tired. She appeared in my cottage that night, materializing in the chair across from where I sat reading. She looked ordinary. A woman in her 40s, maybe, with dark hair streaked with silver, wearing a simple dress that could have come from any village market. "You're disappointed," she said, reading my expression. "You expected something more divine." "I expected something more goddess-like," I admitted. She laughed, and it was a bitter sound. "Gods and goddesses are just very old beings with very old powers, Catalina. We're not what the stories make us out to be." "Then what are you?" "Exhausted," she said. "I've been managing this world for 3,000 years. Do you know how many times I've chosen someone to bear my mark? How many times I've watched them use the power I gave them?" I shook my head. 473 times, she said. "Your number 473. And do you know how many of those mark-bearers did what you did? How many chose restraint over domination? How many built systems that didn't need them? I don't know. 7, she said. Including you. 7 out of 473. The others. They all became Sebastian eventually. Some faster than others. But they all got there. The words hit me like a physical blow. But the mark is supposed to be a gift. A way to create positive change. The mark is power, she said. Just power. What you do with it is your choice. I choose people who have the potential for wisdom, but potential isn't destiny. Most people, when given absolute power, absolutely abuse it. You're an exception. A rare one. She stood and walked to my window, looking out at the moonlit garden. That's why I'm here, she said. I need to ask you something. And I need you to understand that your answer will determine the fate of every kingdom, every person, every future mark-bearer who comes after you. My heart started racing. What are you asking? She turned back to me, and in her eyes, I saw something I never expected to see in a divine being. Fear. I want you to take my place, she said. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The absurdity was too much. You want me to become a goddess. That's impossible. I'm human. I'm mortal. I'm 56 years old and dying, she interrupted. Yes, I know. The mark has been sustaining you, keeping you alive longer than you should have been. But it's fading because I'm fading. The power that created the marks, that chose the bearers, that has guided this world for millennia. It's running out. I sat down heavily. What do you mean, running out? She settled back into her chair, and for the first time, I noticed how transparent she was around the edges. Like she was barely holding herself together. Divine power isn't infinite, she said. It's drawn from belief, from the natural order, from forces even I don't fully understand. But I've been spending it for 3,000 years, and the reservoir is nearly empty. Within a generation, maybe 2, I'll fade completely. And when I go, the marks go with me. No more chosen ones. No more divine intervention. Humanity will be truly on its own. Maybe that's a good thing, I said quietly. Maybe humanity shouldn't rely on divine intervention. She smiled. There's that wisdom that made me choose you. Yes, maybe it is a good thing. But the transition will be catastrophic. Right now, in 17 kingdoms across this world, there are mark-bearers using their power to hold back tyrants, to prevent wars, to stop plagues. When the power disappears, those protections disappear. The world will descend into chaos. So you want me to... What? Take over being the moon goddess. Keep the system running. I want you to transform the system, she said. You've spent 23 years teaching people they don't need divine intervention. You've built governments that function without supernatural guidance. You understand something I never did. The goal isn't to rule well, it's to make ruling unnecessary. She leaned forward, and the desperation in her eyes was unmistakable. I'm offering you my remaining power. All of it. Enough to live for another 1,000 years, to choose mark-bearers to guide the world. But I'm asking you to use it differently than I did. I'm asking you to spend it all, every last drop, teaching humanity to be free. To create a world that doesn't need goddesses or chosen ones or marks of power. To make yourself obsolete on a cosmic scale. And if I refuse, then in 20 years, maybe 30, the power runs out and the world tears itself apart. The mark-bearers I've chosen will lose their abilities overnight. The systems they've been holding together will collapse. Millions will die in the chaos. I stood and paced my small cottage, my mind racing. This is insane, I said. I can't become a goddess. I don't know how to manage divine power. I barely managed the mark. Exactly why you're the right choice, she said. You understand the responsibility. You understand the restraint required. The others, the 466 who failed, they all wanted the power. You never did. That's what makes you trustworthy. But 1,000 years, I whispered. Watching everyone I know die. Living alone with that much power. That's not freedom. That's another kind of cage. She nodded slowly. Yes, it is. I won't lie to you, Catalina. What I'm offering is a burden, not a gift. It's loneliness and responsibility and constant vigilance. It's everything you've already experienced, magnified 1,000-fold. And at the end of it, if you succeed, you'll fade away with nothing to show for it except a world that's forgotten you ever existed. Then why would I possibly say yes? Because you're Catalina de Monteverdi, she said simply. And you've never been able to walk away from people who need you. She gave me a month to decide. A month to contemplate becoming something more than human and less than free. A month to imagine another 1,000 years of impossible choices and grinding responsibility. I spent the first week alone, thinking. The second week, I traveled to Salandria for the anniversary celebration I'd been invited to. The throne room had been transformed. Where Sebastian's marble seat had stood, there was now an open space with comfortable chairs arranged in a circle, the council's meeting place. The crawl space below had been preserved as I'd requested, with a glass floor so visitors could see into it without disturbing it. Thousands of people filled the palace, celebrating 20 years of democracy. I watched them laugh and argue and live their lives without a ruler telling them what to do. Rodrigo found me staring at the glass floor, looking down at the space where I'd spent 3 years of my life. He was old now, 78. His hair white and his hands shaking with age. But his eyes were still sharp. "You're troubled," he said. It wasn't a question. I told him everything. The goddess's visit, her offer. Her warning about what would happen if I refused. He listened in silence, then was quiet for a long time. "Do you remember what you told me the night we freed you from that cage?" he finally asked. "I remember a lot of things from that night. You said, 'I can run.' Your legs had barely worked after 3 years chained to the floor, but you were determined to run. Be free. That's who you were then. Is that still who you are?" "I don't know," I admitted. The girl who said that wanted her own freedom. The woman I became learned to care about everyone else's freedom too. And now I'm being asked to sacrifice my freedom, permanently, to protect theirs. "Then you've already decided," Rodrigo said. "Have I?" He smiled. "You're Catalina de Monteverdi. And you've never been able to walk away from people who need you." The same words the goddess had used. 'Cause they both knew me. Knew that I'd already made my choice the moment she'd explained what was at stake. I just hadn't wanted to admit it yet. I spent the third week visiting the other mark-bearers I'd trained. Gabriel was 31 now, still working in his farming community, using his power to mediate disputes and help his neighbors. When I told him about the goddess's offer, he looked at me with something like pity. "Don't do it," he said. "You've given enough. Let someone else carry the weight." "There is no one else," I said. "She chose me." "She chose you once," he pointed out. "You don't have to let her choose you again. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to rest." "Am I?" "Yes. Are any of us? When we have power and people need help." He didn't have an answer for that. Neither did any of the others I visited. They all said some version of the same thing. I'd given enough. I deserved peace. Someone else could solve the world's problems. But we all knew there was no someone else. There was just me, and a choice, and the knowledge that my answer would ripple across centuries. The fourth week, I did something I'd never done before. I went back to the ruins of my childhood home. It had burned the night Sebastian's guards came for my family. No one had ever rebuilt it. The land had been redistributed to farmers during the reforms, but the actual site of the house remained untouched. A memorial of sorts. Or maybe just a place too haunted for anyone to want. I stood where my mother's garden had been and tried to remember what it felt like to be that girl. The one who read poetry and dreamed of a simple life. Who didn't know what power felt like or what responsibility cost. She felt like a stranger. Someone I'd known once, in another life. But she was also still there, somewhere deep inside me. The part that wanted to be free. That wanted to live a normal span of years. To love without fear of outliving everyone, to rest. "I'm sorry," I said to her. To that 16-year-old girl who'd survived the impossible. "I'm sorry I can't give you the peace you earned." The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the ruins. And I realized something I'd been avoiding for a month. I didn't want to become a goddess. I didn't want another 1,000 years of burden and loneliness and impossible choices. But I'd learned, in that cage under Sebastian's throne, that what we want is less important than what we do. I wanted to survive. I wanted revenge. I wanted to be left alone. Instead, I built a democracy. I taught restraint. I made myself obsolete. Because wanting was a luxury. Doing was a necessity. On the last night of the month, the goddess returned to my cottage. She looked even more transparent than before, as if the effort of waiting had cost her. "Have you decided?" she asked. "I have," I said. "But I have conditions." She raised an eyebrow. "You're negotiating with a dying goddess." "I'm negotiating with someone who needs me more than I need her," I corrected. "If I'm going to do this, it's going to be different. Completely different from how you did it." "I'm listening." "First, no more marks," I said. "No more choosing people and burning symbols into their skin. That system has failed. 466 failures prove it." "Then how will you help humanity?" "By teaching, not choosing. By creating institutions, not empowering individuals. I want your power, but I'm going to use it to build systems that don't need divine intervention. Schools, centers of learning, networks of knowledge. I'm going to spend 1,000 years making sure that by the end, humanity doesn't need goddesses at all." She smiled. "That's why I chose you. Second condition, I'm not doing this alone. I want the ability to share the power temporarily. Not permanently, not as marks, but as short-term partnerships with people I trust. So I don't have to be the only one making decisions." "That's dangerous. You're talking about giving away divine power." "I'm talking about not becoming a tyrant," I said. "Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So I refuse to hold absolute power. I'll distribute it, temporarily, to advisors and partners who can keep me honest. Who can tell me when I'm wrong." The goddess considered this. "It's never been done before." "Good. Then we're innovating." "And your third condition?" I looked her in the eyes. "When the work is done, when humanity truly doesn't need divine guidance anymore, the power ends. No exceptions. No just one more century. I want a hard stop built into this from the beginning. A date certain when all of this goes away and humanity stands on its own." "You're asking me to program your own obsolescence." "I'm asking you to help me finish what I started," I said. "I spent 5 years teaching Salandria it didn't need a ruler. I'll spend 1,000 years teaching the whole world it doesn't need gods. And then I'll let the power die, and I'll die with it, and humanity will finally be free." She was quiet for a long time. Then she stood and extended her hand. "Catalina de Monteverdi," she said formally. "The last time I gave you power, you used it better than anyone before you. I'm trusting you to use even more power even better. Will you accept the burden of divinity, knowing that your success means your own extinction?" I thought about the girl in the cage. The woman who emerged from it. The guardian who learned to rule by not ruling. The teacher who trained others to resist corruption. I thought about 1,000 more years of loneliness and responsibility. And I thought about a world at the end of it all that wouldn't need saving because it had learned to save itself. "Yes," I said and took her hand. The transfer happened instantaneously and over the course of weeks, all at once. I felt 3,000 years of memory flood into my mind. Felt the weight of power beyond comprehension settle onto my shoulders. Felt my body change, becoming something more durable, less human, designed to last centuries. I felt the mark on my shoulder expand, spreading across my back in intricate patterns of silver light. Not just a crescent moon anymore, but a whole cosmology of power and responsibility. And I felt the cage. The invisible one I'd just locked myself involuntarily. A prison not of iron but of duty, stretching across a millennium. The goddess, the former goddess, smiled at me one last time. "Thank you," she said. "And I'm sorry." Then she faded like morning mist, And I was alone with more power than any human should ever possess. That was 3 months ago. I'm still in my cottage, but everything is different. I can feel every mark bearer across the world now, sense their struggles and victories. I can see the systems that are breaking down, the wars brewing, the plagues gestating. And I'm working. Not by choosing new mark bearers. I've kept my promise about that. But by influencing subtly. A dream here, a vision there. Always suggesting, never commanding. Always teaching, never ruling. I've started creating what I call the temples of human wisdom. Not religious sites, but libraries and schools and centers of learning in every kingdom. Places where knowledge is preserved and shared. Where people can learn to solve their own problems without divine intervention. I'm also testing my second condition. Last week, I temporarily shared a portion of my power with a young woman named Sophia, a mathematician who's trying to develop new farming techniques to prevent famines. I gave her the ability to sense which crops would thrive in which soils, but only for a month. She did incredible work. Then the month ended, the power returned to me, and she continued the work on her own, using what she'd learned. That's the model. Temporary boosts to help people help themselves. Never permanent dependency. It's going to take centuries to build the infrastructure humanity needs to stand alone. Centuries of patience and restraint and constant vigilance against my own worst instincts. But I have time now. 1,000 years of it. And at the end, if I've done my job right, there will be no more goddesses. No more marks. No more chosen ones. Just humans, fully in charge of their own destiny. I know what you're thinking. This isn't a happy ending. The girl who survived the cage is now in a bigger cage, one that will last 1,000 years. You're right. But here's what I've learned. Freedom isn't about having no responsibilities. It's about choosing which responsibilities to accept. I could have said no to the goddess. Could have let the power die out and the world fall into chaos. That would have been freedom in a sense. Freedom from burden, from duty, from constant impossible choices. But it wouldn't have been the freedom I actually wanted. The freedom I wanted, the freedom I fought for, is the freedom for everyone to choose their own path. To live without tyrants or divine intervention telling them what to do. And if securing that freedom for future generations means giving up my own freedom for 1,000 years, that's a price I'm willing to pay. Not because I'm noble or self-sacrificing or special, but because I learned in a cage under a tyrant's throne that the most important question isn't, what do I want? It's, what kind of world do I want to leave behind? So that's where the story stands. Not ended but continuing, expanding, evolving into something I never imagined when I first felt the mark burn into my shoulder 23 years ago. If you've stayed with me through 4 parts, through triumph and doubt and transformation and transcendence, then you're part of this story now. You're part of the vision of a world that doesn't need saving because it's learned to save itself. Leave a comment and tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug. And believe me, I mean that more literally now than I did before. Subscribe to this channel because I'm going to keep sharing this journey. The 1,000-year journey. The lessons I learn, the mistakes I make, the slow, grinding work of making divinity obsolete. Hit that like button if you believe what I believe. That the greatest power is the power to make power unnecessary. That the noblest goal is to work toward your own irrelevance. That the truest freedom is choosing your cage, then spending eternity teaching others how to be free. The throne is empty. And in 1,000 years, if I do this right, heaven will be empty too. Because humanity won't need it anymore. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing with me that we're strong enough to stand on our own. I'll see you in the next chapter, however long that takes.